Hi, I'm Dr. Mike, and this is NFGeeks. This video is my second attempt of answering a question that was posed on Sunday for the Ask Dr. Mike series on the NFGeeks discussion group forum on Facebook. So every Sunday, I'm going to have people ask questions for me to answer in a video that day, or maybe a little bit after. And whoever's question gets the most votes with likes is the question that I answer. So this is my second attempt at answering the question that won the vote on Sunday. I did record a half-hour video, a very nice one, on Sunday, but apparently when I recorded, it messed up and most of it was lost, and so I have to make a second video. And I'm not too upset about it because I think this video is actually a little bit better, because I'm sort of framing it in a better way, and I like the way I'm framing it. The same answer, I mean, I have the same answer, but I'm framing it in a way that I like better than I did the last time. So let's get to it before before this all craps out on me again. And the winner was Jeff Miller, otherwise known as SB Spaz, here on YouTube, and he took time out of his quest, for his lunch, you know, his hero's quest, for his lunch to take time out to write a question. And here's his question. I'm sort of paraphrasing here. There's really two parts of it, and one is how has knowing Myers-Briggs helped in my communication with people, specifically different types, especially sensors, and what are some helpful tips for others in terms of communication? And that's a great question. I mean, very important, of course. So before I get to that, I'm going to answer the question, and I'm going to start with a saying from counseling, and that is about the nature of conflict between two people. And what the saying says is that, and it's very wise, is that conflict is when you have this idea of what you want a person to be, and then there is this reality of how the person actually is. And conflict is trying to get these two things to come together, okay, and not being able to. And honestly, I'm being idealistic here by putting it in the middle. Really, what we really try to do is not even change this, but try to bring people right into how we want them to be, and it never reaches, and we get into this big fight and whatever. That's the nature of conflict. And you don't even have to be in typology to see that. You could be outside of Myers-Briggs and all that, and you can see the wisdom in that saying. And I start off with that because very much communication is involved with that in many ways. Specifically is that what we want, how we want people to be, is that we want people to communicate to us the way we want them to communicate to us, and we want to communicate back to them the way we want to communicate back to them. So that's the nature of conflict and how it relates to communication. And it relates to communication in Myers-Briggs in that each temperament has a very specific way of communicating, of reporting their process and language that they're using, and the way they're using that language. And not accepting that use of language or whatever, that's part of the conflict. Wanting people to communicate in a different way, wanting people to hear in a different way. That's the nature of conflict, or part of the nature of conflict as it was described. So I want to get into what do you need to do. So I guess I'm going to start with the tips as to what do you need to do to improve communication. And the first thing I want to get into is, and this is really more my own method, but just to show you how I arrived at this, is that I have my own version of type method, which I just kind of calling right now holistic typing. It's not really a method like a teachable theory method steps thing. I mean, eventually I suppose it will be, and I'll write something down or whatever, teach it, but It really is just something that's in my mind, my own process about it. And it's very ENFP. That's why I don't necessarily teach it as an actual method, because I think you have to have some really strong, extroverted intuition for this. But but still, I guess anybody could do it if they tried. Or we'll see if I can teach it. What I'm trying to do with it is trying to create a holistic way of looking at someone to get to type and to understand type, as opposed to the other way, which is from science, which is reductionism. Get it to the part, get it to the smaller parts, and the smaller parts, and the smaller parts, and break it down. That's where all this, function stuff comes from. And I want to take the opposite approach, which is holistic. Holistic meaning whole, not alternative. So I'm meaning holistic in a more of a gestalt sense of how we perceive a whole and how we, understand reality by always trying to find a greater whole. How things fit together as one whole thing and not its parts. You know, so that's very much a part of my view, and it's part of my view even outside of typology, because a lot of my academic career was involved in holism and holistic thinking and holistic paradigms and models. So this is a much stronger part of myself than I've kind of revealed on YouTube and with NFGeeks. So maybe I should start doing that. So my way of typing is to take in an entire context at once, okay, and look at the person and look at things in terms of everything that's involved, okay, and not just the whole thing with type. You can't understand a person on a function alone. You have to see it in the totality of everything, as part of this greater whole of a person. And not just that, but even beyond that, into groups. How is one person of one type interacting with another person in a group in terms of context? And that could be cultural and age and a whole bunch of other things. And that view, sort of, that way of typing people and understanding type through this holistic view, informs much of my own ideas and much of my own ability to type with all of this. So I start with that because that's relevant to how I'm coming to these things, I think, and coming to these conclusions. So first, and this relates back now to the saying about conflict, is that the first thing you need to do in order to communicate effectively with a type or any temperament is to accept the person, and more importantly, accept their type and temperament totally as is. Okay? Yes, we've all had difficulties with each other's types and temperaments and all that. We've talked about that ad nauseum on NFGeeks and on the forum. Okay, we all know this. But really, if to answer the question, if we're going to have a dialogue with somebody, okay, you have to accept them as they are and not try to make them what you need them to be, because that's treating them as an object. You are a thing that I get to experience as a tool, or just experience as an experience, and therefore I get to manipulate you the way I want to get the experience that I want. Okay, and that's not that's not communication, and that actually creates bad communication, if it creates communication at all. So the first step in communicating is absolutely acceptance of the type. Okay, so if somebody is an ISFP or an ENTJ or an INFP or whatever their type is, you have to accept them as the type, or accept the type as the type, and not have expectations of them changing in that way. Okay, this kind of relates to a video I did previously about how you really can't expand the functions. You really have to accept the limitations of the functions. Now I'm sort of expanding that out to, you also have to accept the limitations of the other temperament or type. Okay, that there are going to be some limitations in terms of understanding and whatever, and you have to accept them like that, instead of trying to bend them and try to get them into what you want them to be. You just have to accept them right from go. Whatever it is, you accept the type as the type. All right, so the first step of communication is that. You don't have that, nothing else is going to work. Okay, so this is the foundation of communication. Okay, accepting a type and a person as is. Okay, now doing that, you also have to do your homework, and I don't know if people are doing their homework enough. And doing your homework is not just talking about the functions again. You have to know what the type descriptions are for all 16 types. You have to know the descriptions. You have to know all the parts of the description, how they are in relationships and in communication and process, and how it's different from an introverted and extroverted, the same, functions or whatever. You have to, again, take a holistic view, and a holistic view means educating yourself on all these things in every way that you can. Now, one way that's very important for communication, and it's not an accident that this is NFGeeks, is to look at Keirsey's Please Understand Me Too, and the way he describes the four temperaments. He is the father of that. So the way he talks about SJs, NFs, all that, is I would say, is the next key, really, to understanding. And I don't mean just understanding what does it mean to be an NF, what does it mean to be an SJ, but to really get into the language of the four temperaments. Okay, so I mean by doing your homework, getting into trying to understand how do they talk, how are they expressing ideas, literally communicating it out. And that matters because process, if you want to say function process, cognitive function process, or whatever, the process of how things are being taken in epistemologically and then processed, whether how you feel about it or think about it, and the communication process are mutually causal. This is what I mean by, again, holistic. It's not linear. It's mutual causality, where one is creating the other and interacting with the other. Okay, so communication isn't just understanding words. It's seeing how the words reflect process and trying to understand that. Okay, so then after accepting person, the next step is do your homework and figure out the temperaments. Now, specifically language, okay, because we're talking about communication. And understanding how the language of the temperaments are is key to being able to hear it and speak it. We have to look at the way the temperaments speak as like foreign languages, okay? And in foreign languages, you have to sort of learn to speak the other language and learn how to hear it and learn how to say it. And granted, there's never going to be a full translation. People who have more than, speak more than one language can speak to that. But and if you want to have communication with another temperament or type, you have to learn their language, to hear it and to speak it. Okay? And Keirsey is great for that because he has a whole thing based on language. It's not just about being an NF and having NF values and NT values or whatever. Yeah, that's important, but there's a whole part of Keirsey that's about language, specific to language. So we want to use that. All right, so what's my next tip is, memorize how they talk and the words they're using, not just their ideas, but how they are speaking and expressing these ideas, because again, they're going hand in hand. Now, not to get ahead of myself, but we're going to look at two forms of communication, and that is the words, the way communication is expressed through verbal communication, through the temperaments, and we're also going to look at behavior, though, because behavior is absolutely a way of communicating, and it's actually a stronger form of communication than even the words. So next tip is the two things you have to do is you have to learn the word usage and the word language and the language that the types use in the words and the way they form words and all that. But you also have to look at the behavior of the type, and not the behavior of the type just as, well, they have this process and here's the behavior, but as form of communication. What is the behavior communicating? And you have to think holistically for all this. Okay, so let's look at language and give some examples. I'm going to give some examples of how language works with this, and what you should be looking for. And I'm going to talk mostly about SJ as my example, because I just spent a lot of time with my SJ family in its totality, and I was talking about all this stuff all weekend, and so it's on my mind and it's easy to do because it's it's recent. Okay, so Keirsey has this whole sort of thing about communicating and some specific things about communicating, and if you can sort of get into that and understand it, you can sort of understand what's going on in terms of their language. One of the mistakes is that we hear the other temperaments talk, and instead of understanding how the temperament actually talks and how this relates to the temperament, we're simply processing it through our own process and interpreting what it means to us as if we were saying it, and that's not the same thing. For example, right, just to briefly, is that NFs interpret a lot of what SJs say as hurtful and mean and just unempathic and all these things, and we cry. That's because if we said those things, that's how we would mean them. But that's not hearing their language. Okay, so learn to speak the language. So let's look at SJ language. Okay, so and I'm going to use some of the terms that Kiersey uses himself. So first of all, the main thing he says is that it's associative. Okay, and what he means by associative is that SJs are connecting people. They learn and they talk through connections. Okay, there has to be some sort of linear kind of obvious concrete connections from A to B to C to D, because that's how they think. So they're going to talk like that. Okay, they're going to talk about how something connects to something connects to something. It could be in time, you know what I mean? It could be hypothetical time, things like that. Well, this is going to happen in time this way, but everything has to sort of lead into the next thing like a chain. It's got to be like chained together. Okay. Now, so first, that's what you have to understand. All right, it's not going to be boring. It's not that they're stupid. People think censors are stupid. That's not the case at all. Okay, with SPs or SJs, but it's an associative language of connecting. All right. Now, this is one of the hardest ones for NFs. Is that SJs? Everything SJ says, even when they don't mean it to sound like this, it sounds like they're barking out orders. Okay, this is what he means by Kiersey means by imperative. Okay, language. It sounds like commands, and really it's not so much that they're barking out orders, although sometimes they do and they certainly can. They're really just telling you steps of how to do something, or things that they think need to happen so that something good can take place, or something practical needs to take place, or something bad is not to take place, things like that. But they're really sort of expressing something like, here's what needs to be done, okay, for this thing to take place. You want this thing to take place, you have to do these things. And so it comes out like like coming out as orders, being given. You got to go to the corner, and then you have to turn left, and don't forget that there's going to be a pothole, and whatever. It sounds like it's orders, but it's really more of a methodological step kind of thing. And it's very direct. SJs speak very directly, and that's why it's coming out as orders. But again, you shouldn't interpret it that way. It's more like instructions than it is orders. Okay, just because they're not taking feelings into account or whatever, that's because they're not looking at that. But they're looking at, here's what needs to be done, and this is how you do it. Okay, doesn't mean they're insensitive. It means that they're communicating in a very specific way. Now relate this to process. Is why you got to be holistic. Why do they want to do that? Because they have very, very specific needs, and they're trying to reach very specific goals, and they're trying to be logistic and make sure we have enough of whatever for whatever it is that we need, and they're trying to work towards the sustaining of a specific group. So they're giving out very specific very specific directions for very specific goals that are concrete and observable, quantifiable, all of that. So that's what you have to listen to. Okay. One of the things that's I find interesting with SJs is, and Kiersey is very sort of wise in talking about this, is the concept of orthodoxy. Okay. And so, how are they talking? What kind of language they're going to use? What does it mean to have orthodox language? What it means is that, very simply, there's a right way to talk and there's a wrong way to talk. And I don't mean this in a rigid sense. See, we interpret this as SJ fascism, and I've joked about that, but I want to speak about it in a real way, and that is that what it means is that under certain contexts, there's a right way to talk and a right way to talk, a right way to use language and a wrong way to use language. And that can be based on rank, it could be based on social situation, it could be based on professional context, whatever it is. But there's a correct way to talk and there's not a correct way to talk based on where you are. And the reason why that is because it interferes. If you're speaking the wrong way, you're not going to get certain goals met. You're not going to learn how to do certain things. There could be disunity in the group. It's all sort of legitimate stuff. So now put the things together, and again, you have to realize what's going on. A SJ will sort of give you orders as to how you should talk, okay? And, we all sort of misinterpret that wrong in a way, or it gives us, because we're interpreting it the way we would say it and what it would mean. So, for example, here's one of my favorite examples of this about Orthodox. I was about 9 or 10, and my mother said to me, and I don't know why she said this exactly straight up to me, because I was already there consciously anyway. I don't think she knew I was an NF, and that I already could get there without her telling me. But she was very clear on this point. I took it very seriously. She basically said that I am not to call anybody who's friends with her who comes over the house by their first name, ever, under any context, no matter what. I can know their first name, but I'm never to call them by their first name, no matter who they are. It's always Mr. or Mrs. or Ms. or Miss or whatever, but it's always by, that proper thing and last name, okay? Cousins and family, uncles, aunts, okay, that's fine. But anybody who's a friend, even if it's a close friend, somebody's been over the house a million times, they are Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so. And that's that, okay? Now, this had such a strong impression on me that there are friends of my mother. My mother's passed away, and there are friends of my mother's in their 80s, and I will still call them that. I'll call, my mother's friend Mrs. Anderson. I will call her Mrs. Anderson until she dies. I'll never call her by her first name. But you can see the two things here in terms of the imperative and Orthodox language here with SJs. My mother wasn't trying to be oppressive, okay, or trying to just be rigid and whatever. Now at the time, I think I had like an anxiety attack, but that's not what she meant. She was giving me specific instructions. This is what you need to do, okay? Because it's important socially in terms of the way adults and kids talk to each other. And there's a specific rule of language. Kids do not talk to adults like they're other kids, okay? There's, my mother and the ethnic culture my mother came from was very much, there are adults and there are children, and it's family, but they're not on the same level, okay? And they're not on the same level, and there's certain ways children talk to adults, and that's that, and there's no loosey-goosiness about that. And so, and again, it's not oppressive. This is the social context. This is how you have to speak. Here's how you do it, okay? It's not oppressive at all. There's really, that's the language, okay? Hearing the language. So you have to, when you listen to SJ's talk, you can't take it all how it's affecting you. You have to really think about how are they talking. And once you get into the place of how they're talking, then you can get into the place of what their values and orientations are, and then you can, and then you could also see them who they really are. Again, you have to start with acceptance off, from go. But this is how you get there, and also, return to a state of acceptance. And it comes from understanding their language and being able to hear it, and then that helps you understand the process. So that first bit in Kiersey's thing about language and how all the temperaments talk, this is very important, okay? And that's, how you do it. And again, some examples for, let's talk about NFs, of course. NFs speak in a very interpretive, metaphoric way. Everything is, symbolism, and metaphors, and this is why we're very poetic, okay? And it's very emotional. We speak of emotions and feelings. They're not just abstract symbols like in algebra or physics, the way NTs use their language. It's much more emotional, symbolic content, and that's important because when you're hearing an NF, they're not trying to be vague, and they're not trying to be overly sensitive. This is how an NF is trying to see the world, express the world, understand the world through symbolism. So you can't take NF language at its concrete level. You may not get what the symbolism is, but you always have to remember there's symbolism going on, there's metaphor going on, So there's that. Now, the other side of this with language is behavior. And one of the most important things I learned as a social worker working in the mental health system is that, nonverbal content is more important than verbal content. Okay? Always, always, always. As an ENFP, I really sort of understand this deeply, and I go on it all the time. I'm very clear on this point. If you want to get to the reality of something, don't pay attention to what they're doing, not what they're saying. Okay? Because people say all sorts of things. So the behavior associated with a temperament, you have to see that as a type of communication. okay, is a way that that something is being communicated across the place. And so one of the things to look at is social roles, and that's again at the another Keirsey thing. And let's go back to SJs. SJs in relationships, Keirsey talks about in terms of like romantic relationships or whatever. But you can see this in any kind of relationship. SJs are communicate things through helping. Okay, they want to help. All right, they're trying to help. So you have to see what they're doing as a form of help. And when they're doing things, they're communicating that they care and that you matter and that they're trying to meet your needs, and they're doing this through very sort of concrete helping. Okay, so you have to view that behavior in that way. So, for example, one of the things everybody who complains about as SJ parents, and like I did, is that you get lots of Christmas presents, but it's all things like socks and sweaters and like Black and Decker drills, blenders, things you need for the apartment, And if you're an NF, you're sort of like, where's the Santa Claus stuffed animal with my card, But again, that's us. They're trying to communicate how they think, what they think about you, okay, and how much you mean to them. That action is a way of communicating. When they're angry with you, what do? They don't give you help. They withdraw that help. Okay, that's how it's a form of communication. Look for the behavior. Don't look at it how it's directly affecting you, but what do they mean by it? Because you be like, because I know we all like this with like some SJs, like they're trying to help and they're just hurting your feelings. I'm speaking of NFs, and then they stop, and you're like, oh, thank God. But really, if you see that as a communication, that's not a good thing. That means they gave up. That means they're not happy. Okay, so you have to look at behavior as a form of communication. And lastly, I'll say about this is you really have to think about in communication one other thing that they give, that the other temperament is giving, and what they want to receive. So, for example, if you use SJs, they're big into gratitude. Okay, when they're talking about gratitude, giving gratitude to you, they're talking to you about something. And here's the thing: they want to receive gratitude. Okay. So, all right, so the first tip then, let's get back to the whole thing with the tips, is that you have to learn the language of the temperament specifically, okay? You have to listen for it. It's not just enough memorizing Keirsey's little boxes and things. You have to really sort of understand what he's saying. You have to internalize it, and you have to listen to it, okay, and hear it for what it is. And again, accepting it as is. That's, we're going backwards again. You have to accept it as is, all right? Because you're going to misinterpret it totally. If you're an NF and you want SJs to talk to you a certain way, because again, you want them to change, you're not accepting them as they are. You want SJs to be the way you want them to be, and you want them to talk to you a certain way, and they're not talking to you a certain way, you're going to get angry. Okay, why aren't they talking to me the way I want to? That kind of thing. That's bad. Now, the next thing then is you have to talk the way the other temperament or type can hear. This is a little harder, okay, for all the temperaments, but you have to speak in that way. So, if you want to, really communicate with an SJ, so what do you got to do? You got to give specific orders and directions, okay? You have to like talk like that. Even if you don't like talking like that, you have to learn to talk like that. And again, it's not barking out orders. NFs think it's all like yelling and screaming because that's how we hear it, but it's really not like that. But when you're talking to SJ, you got to give them specific, orders, and again, connections, associations, A to B to C to D, and that results in concrete goal, D, E, F, whatever. You get it results in something tangible. So you're giving them steps to something tangible, okay? And orthodoxy, that's important. Talk to the SJ the way they need to be spoken to, with the words based on the social context, okay? Whether it's parent-child, co-workers, talking to the boss, talking to cops, whatever it is, speak the orthodox language for SJs. And granted, this is just SJs. This goes for all the temperaments, just using them as an example. But you have to learn their talk and be able to talk it, okay, to them. And it could be instructions like, look, I'm an NF, and this is how you understand me, A, B, C, D, E. Okay, that counts. Okay, that counts as good communication because you're leading them to an idea that you're trying to express. But you can't just start talking about like metaphors and the hubcap of your heart on the wheel of love. And you can't, if you're an NF, you can't talk about that with SJs. You already lost them. And again, that's not accepting them for who they are. Okay? So you have to learn to speak their language back to them. Okay? And again, that also has to do with behaviors. You have to pick up the cues of behavior as a way of communicating, like being helpful and things like that, and not being helpful and what that means. And you have to also exhibit those behaviors at the same time, because that's a form of communication to SJs. You want to communicate to an SJ, be helpful to the SJ. Helpful does not mean writing a poem. It's okay. It means like taking out the garbage and things like that. That's communicating something. So you got to get into their world and do all that. Okay. So let's quickly review. All right. You have to accept people as they are. It's like accept the type totally as it is. It's not going to change. Types don't change. People don't change. I know you think you can change. You're not going to change. Okay. Accept the type as is. Totally. Okay. Do your homework. Read about the types. Read about the temperaments, and understand the language issues with each temperament. How they form words. How the words are put together. What are the rules about the words? And what are the behaviors that are connected to this that are also communicating something. Okay. You have to learn to see it and hear it, and you have to learn to do it. Okay, and it takes practice. All right. So, what are some examples with this? What are some examples? One important example is, and I've tried to teach this and tell people about this, is how to talk to cops. Okay, this is really very useful. And granted, I am just talking about dealing with cops just in normal situations. Whether it's just like they're giving directions at a detour, or they're speeding tickets or whatever. But I'm sure if you're arrested for all sorts of nefarious things, this would work too. But a lot of cops are SJs, and you'll kind of tell if you know your temperament. You'll know whether you're dealing with an SJ cop or an SP cop, because those are the most. Cops are usually SJs or SPs, mostly SJs, but a lot of SPs are cops. The excitement, the thrill, car chases. I've known a lot of SP cops, but you'll be able to tell. So let's assume it's an SJ cop. Okay. Well, listen to his words. Yeah, he's giving you orders. Go here, go there, don't park here. It's not trying to hurt your feelings, okay? Hear what he's saying, and then talk back to the cop in that way. It not only barking out orders, but they need A to B to C to D. So when they start asking you why did you do something or what are you doing, that's how you talk. A to B to C to D. Don't talk about your feelings and your hurt and the universe. They'll think you're high. I'm really sorry, the NFs. Don't talk like that. But talk the way they talk. Orthodox language. There's a right way to talk to cops, and there's a wrong way to talk to cops. Speak the right way to cops, and that means respect, and more importantly, gratitude. Okay, a lot of cops are SJs. They don't want a ton of money. They just want you to say thank you. Really. That's what they want to say, because in their mind they're really trying to help. They're cops. They're out there. They really are. So how do you talk to cops? Be thankful. Use the language that's appropriate in that moment to speak to the officer. Okay, and I do that. Okay, I do that when I speak to cops, even if it's just silly things like detours. Go left, and the cop is like telling you go this and do this. When I pass him, I always say thank you. Okay, I say thank you. And you can tell he's a little more appreciative, he's a little happier. Hey, somebody said thank you for what I'm doing. It's a nice thing to do. Okay? That's one little example. Other examples are, talking to Noah as an SJ, giving that example. Giving him, I have to give him specific instructions for things. I can't just assume that he knows, or even about my feelings, how I feel about something and how I'm going to feel if he does this. That's NF stuff. I can't give that to him. He's not going to get there. If I think like that with him, then I'm not accepting Noah as Noah. So I try to give him very specific A to B to C to D, instructions that lead to concrete goal. Again, E, F, G, whatever it is. Even if it's my feelings, I try to get, I kind of get him there. I try to speak in, the Orthodox language, and again, it doesn't mean conservative. The Orthodox language I use with Noah is the language we've established because it's just me and him here. Okay, so whatever little thing we have here between us, I talk to him in that way. I don't talk to him as if I'm his teacher. I don't talk to him out of context. And that's really what they mean by Orthodox. It's not conservative. You don't talk to somebody out of the social context if you're dealing with SJs. There's various contexts. You speak to them within that context. and I try to do that. Okay, I don't talk to him the way his mother talks to him. That's a different context. Okay, and if I started doing that, it would screw him up. Okay, and he wouldn't appreciate it because it's, the words are not coming in the right way based on the social situation as it exists. So that's one thing I try to do with Noah, is to speak that way. Um, Now, one thing that you might have to do in practice with this is you might have to slow your process, because you're taking your temperament and then trying to translate it into another temperament's language, and that's going to cause you to speak slower and a little more simpler, and that's okay. It's better to go slower and simpler than to go quick and screw it up and get upset. Okay, sometimes when I'm getting into SJ or whatever, I go a little. It takes me a little while. I have to go slower. It's not. It's faster with NTs because we're intuitives and I'm in academia, so I can speak NT a lot faster than I can speak SJ or SP, because it's just, I don't. You'd think living with SJs I would know it a little better. I don't know it badly, but sometimes it comes out slow and simple, and I have to think. And then before I speak, and that's correct. Do that. Think before you speak. Think about who you're dealing with, and speak that language. Okay. So that's one little example, is cops and Noah. That's another example. And I think another example is communicating with NTs. Like NTs is really talking the rational talk to have them understand where you're coming from, specifically as an NF. Okay. And I'm going to get to NFs in a minute of all this, but really you do a better job just trying to speak the NT language of deduction and rationalism, and sort of the their empirical epistemology about things, and using their language. So for example, NTs are very technical in their language, very, very complex technical terms about whatever it is they're talking about. Speak those words. Don't try to dumb it down. They're not dumbing it down. You don't dumb it down. You don't dumb it down. Yeah, it may mean you have to go on, online dictionary and figure out what they're saying. Yeah, well then that's what you do. Okay, that's how you can hear it and you can talk back in that way. And again, that has to all do with language. I do that a lot with NTs, whether it's online or on YouTube or just in my life. I try to do that. And I'm more fluent in it. It's because I'm around NTs more and I understand their process. So, I try to do it that way. But it does make a difference. It does make a huge difference in terms of communicating. Now, the last thing I want to say is I'm going to scold my fellow NFs, okay, on this, because I find that NFs sometimes are believe it or not, are the biggest abusers of not listening and getting this messed up and causing conflicts. I know you might think, what? Isn't the other way around? Well, it should be, but it isn't, okay? And that's because of, to be honest with everybody about NF, the distance between understanding in either direction is vast, okay? And this makes it very hard for NFs. So what I mean by that is that NFs understand what's going on with the other temperaments better than the other temperaments understand what's going on with NFs. Okay, so there's this huge gap. And what NFs want is for the other person, the other temperament, whatever it is, to communicate with them, and communicate with them the way the NF is trying to communicate back. The NFs do try to make an attempt at speaking, at least unconsciously, the way the other temperaments speak. But what they really want is the other temperament to respond the way they want to respond. And the reason why I'm critical of this with NFs is that, really, my fellow NFs, you should know better. No, really, you should know better, because your NFs, we can get deep into people's souls and in their minds and read them correctly. And NFs should know, just from being NFs, that the SJ cannot understand or speak that metaphorical emotional language. Okay? They can't speak it, and they can't hear it, or they can barely speak it, barely hear it, and being all flustered and upset that they're not hearing it, and being a crybaby about it, is really not accepting the person as they are. And the reason why I'm critical of that is an NF has the best antenna to understand how a person is as they actually are, and therefore should have the easiest time accepting it. But sometimes we're the worst offenders of this. Okay, granted, it's the sensitivity thing coming in with that too. You know, I'm an NF, I know how it runs. But again, really, we should know better because we can read people very, very, very well. And so we should understand that they are the way they are. And that ability to empathize and understand should really be used in hearing them the way they talk and then talking back to them the way they need to hear. Even if that's a lot harder for them when dealing with us. And it's always going to be that way. Okay, they're not going to be. It's not going to be a lot harder for the other types and temperaments to do it back to us than we can do it to them. And you just have to kind of go with that because you have to accept them as they are. If there's going to be communication with the NF and the other temperament, it's up to the NF to go the extra mile because we can do that, and it's a lot harder for them to go the extra mile. They're not going the extra mile because they hate us or whatever. They simply have a harder time with our language and our process. So we have to go that way. Okay. So that's about it. So remember, the steps are easy. Okay. Acceptance, full acceptance of the type or temperament as is, no matter what. Okay, and the person of the type as is. Do your homework. Learn how each temperament uses language, uses words, and uses their behavior to communicate. And then look for that, okay? Internalize what that is, and then look for that in terms of how they're talking and what words they're choosing. And then try to learn to talk back to them that way, in their language, okay? In the way they speak, not in the way, you want it to, you want it to speak, okay? But the way you want to hear it and the way you want to say it, do it the way they want to hear it and the way they and listen to the way they say it. And if we all did this, then it would be a lot easier for all of us to understand each other and communicate, hopefully. So that's it. That's my answer. Pretty long for that one. And all right, enjoy, and I will gladly like to see the comments and people talk about communication and type. Okay, thanks everybody.